Welcome back, everyone, to Beyond the Darkness. In today's episode, we're delving into echoes of the Appalachian. These are the eerie, unexplained encounters that have haunted the Appalachian Mountains for generations. If you think you know everything about this ancient landscape, think again. But before we dive into the mystery, make sure to subscribe, give a like, and share this with your friends. Let me know where you're tuning in from. Thank you all for joining. Now let's venture into the unknown. When I was assigned to work in the northern reaches of the Appalachian forest, I didn't know what I was getting myself into. The job seemed simple enough, basic trail maintenance and forest upkeep, but there was something different about that part of the woods. Something ancient, something that hadn't been touched by time in ways the rest of the forest had. The hollow had been off limits for years. Rangers, hikers, even the locals all avoided it, but no one could really say why. The area had a reputation. Stories of missing people, strange noises, lights in the trees at night, and the unsettling feeling that someone, or something, was always watching. But I had no time for folklore. I needed the work, and it was just another part of the job. At least, that's what I thought. But as long as Uncle Thorn was around, it didn't seem so scary. He kept us busy with building slingshots, setting up tin can targets, welding junk metal into strange sculptures. One year, he helped me make a lizard out of spoons. We'd burn things in the fire pit for no reason other than to watch them melt. He was like a big kid with tools and bad ideas. Still, the best part, the part we always looked forward to every summer, was the switchback hunt. It was a game Uncle Thorn invented, or said he didn't invent, depending on how serious he felt like being that day. According to him, the switchbacks were part crow, part squirrel, with claws like sewing needles and an obsession with shiny objects. They supposedly lived in thorny patches deep in the forest, only coming out at night to steal from campers. But they didn't take food. They wanted things that sparkled: buttons, keys, coins, watches. And if you left something valuable out, they'd swap it with something weird: a dead bird, a rock shaped like a tooth. Or once, Uncle Thorn claimed, a perfectly folded napkin soaked in pine resin. We never really believed him, but we wanted to. Every year, Uncle Thorn would pick one night and announce it was time. He'd hand out old, musty burlap sacks that smelled like mildew, pass around flashlights that barely held a charge, and off we'd go. My brother, two cousins, and me, trailing behind Uncle Thorn with a mix of excitement and a little bit of dread. That year, 2006, I think Uncle Thorn had something new. He said he found fresh switchback prints just past the last fork in the trail. He called us over to the edge of the tree line and pointed to some scuffed leaves and claw marks in the dirt. I couldn't see anything unusual, but I nodded along like I did. Then, Uncle Thorn leaned in real close and whispered that whatever left those marks was bigger than usual. He smiled, like he always did, wide and mischievous, but there was something in his eyes that made my stomach twist. We set off just around dusk. The air was warm and sticky, that kind of humidity that made your shirt cling to your back. The woods felt different that night, almost alive in a way that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The only sounds were the distant rustling of leaves and our feet crunching on the dry ground. Even the usual night creatures seemed quiet. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. Uncle Thorn led the way, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the dark like a knife. The rest of us followed close behind, each of us gripping our own flashlights, their weak beams trembling in the heavy air. I could feel my heart beating faster, a little out of rhythm, like it knew something I didn't. My cousins whispered nervously, but no one dared to say much. There was an unspoken rule in the woods. You didn't break the silence unless you had to. To stay close, Uncle Thorn's voice came low, almost a growl. You never know where they're watching from. I wasn't sure who he meant by they, but I didn't ask. Everyone else was already keeping their distance from me. A strange chill ran down my spine, and I suddenly wished I were back in the cabin by the fire, with the smell of pine resin and old wood in the air. But then, I saw it. A flash of something moving in the shadows. It was quick, like a flicker of movement behind a cluster of trees. I froze. "Did you see that?" I whispered, barely able to breathe. Uncle Thorn didn't stop walking. "Probably just a deer. Keep moving." I swallowed hard, trying to shake off the sudden unease. It wasn't a deer. It had been too fast, too low to the ground. Something about the way it moved didn't feel right. But I didn't say anything else. I was starting to understand that in these woods, if you didn't know what it was better not to ask. The trail twisted and turned as we went deeper into the forest. The trees loomed like giants, their twisted branches reaching toward us like skeletal hands. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing down on us, making the air feel thick, almost suffocating. The farther we went, the quieter it became. My flashlight flickered, and I quickly smacked it, hoping it would stay on. I could see the others doing the same, their lights dancing erratically as if they too were starting to lose confidence. After what felt like an eternity, we came to a clearing. Uncle Thorn stopped suddenly and pointed to the ground. "Look," he said, his voice low. I stared at the ground, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were marks in the dirt, long, deep scratches, like something had clawed its way through the earth. But these weren't the kind of marks you'd expect from an animal. These were different. The shapes didn't make sense, as if something had moved in a pattern too strange for me to recognize. Uncle Thorn crouched down beside the marks and ran his fingers over them. "That's them," he said, his voice filled with something that sounded like a mix of excitement and fear. "Switchback prints." I stared at the marks in disbelief. "Are you sure? They don't look like any animal prints I've ever seen." Uncle Thorn looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "That's because they aren't. And they're not like anything you'll find in a book either. These creatures, they're not just animals. They're something else." I felt a shiver run through me, but I didn't want to say anything. I just nodded, unsure of what else to do. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, and I could feel my breath catching in my throat. It wasn't just the marks on the ground anymore. It was everything. The way the trees seemed to close in on us. The quiet, heavy silence that hung in the air. The hairs on my arms stood on end, and I found myself glancing around constantly, half expecting something to jump out at me from the shadows. Uncle Thorn stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands. "All right," he said, his voice steady again. "Let's keep going." They're close. We pressed on, the darkness swallowing us whole as we ventured deeper into the forest. The air felt thick, heavy with the weight of something unseen, and my heart was pounding in my chest. The flashlight beams cut through the blackness like fragile threads of light, but the forest seemed determined to keep its secrets hidden. Every so often, the beams would catch a reflection from the trees, but there was never anything there when we looked closer. Uncle Thorn led us without hesitation, like he knew exactly where he was going. His movements were steady, calculated, while the rest of us shuffled behind, trying to keep up with his pace. The farther we went, the more the air seemed to press down on me, like the forest itself was alive, aware of our presence. I tried not to think about it, but it was hard not to feel like we were being watched. The others were mostly silent, their feet moving in time with mine, but their breath came in quick, nervous bursts. Every so often, I would hear a whisper from one of my cousins, but it was always too quiet to catch the words. I didn't want to ask what was on their minds. I had a feeling we were all thinking the same thing. "What do you think it'll be this time?" I asked, trying to break the silence, but my voice came out shakier than I intended. Uncle Thorn didn't look back. "Same thing it always is. You just need to be ready." "You're ready for what?" I asked. But Uncle Thorn didn't answer. His voice was low, almost a growl as he muttered to himself. I could feel the tension building in my chest, knotting up with every step. My feet felt heavier, as though the forest itself was trying to drag me down, and the only thing that kept me moving forward was the fact that Uncle Thorn was ahead, guiding us. I tried to ignore the feeling of something brushing against the back of my neck, the faintest sensation of being followed. We reached another clearing, but this one felt different. The air had shifted, a strange, cold breeze cutting through the stillness. My flashlight flickered, and I smacked it again, desperately trying to get it to stay on. The trees around us creaked as if they were shifting, stretching their limbs towards us. For a moment, everything was so quiet. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. "Do you hear that?" one of my cousins whispered, his voice trembling. I froze. The air seemed to hum with anticipation, and I strained to hear. There it was, a faint rustling, like leaves shifting on the ground, but too soft to be caused by anything natural. It wasn't wind. It was too deliberate, too controlled. The sound came from somewhere to my left, and my eyes darted toward it. But I saw nothing. Only shadows. "Uncle Thorne?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He held up a hand, silencing me. His eyes were wide now, scanning the darkness around us. "Stay close," he ordered quietly, though there was a hard edge to his voice. "They're close." I swallowed hard, my throat dry. My fingers tightened around the flashlight, but it suddenly felt useless. It was as though the darkness itself was eating up the light. The rustling grew louder, closer, and I could feel the hairs on my arms stand up. There was something out there, something that wasn't supposed to be in the woods, but was. Uncle Thorne crouched down again, his eyes flicking over the ground. He looked up at us, his expression grim. "Keep quiet," he warned. "We don't want them to know we're here." I could barely breathe. Whatever it was that was out there, it wasn't just a shadow or a trick of the light. It was real, and it was moving toward us. Slowly, carefully, as though it knew exactly where we were. "Move," Uncle Thorne said, standing up suddenly and walking into the trees. We followed, the silence between us now thick enough to choke on. With every step, I felt like I was getting further and further away from the safety of the cabin. The woods felt endless, and every twisted tree and shadowed corner seemed to hold a secret. And then I saw it, a flash of movement, a dark shape darting between the trees. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze. It was too quick to make out clearly, but it was big, much bigger than any animal I'd ever seen. My breath caught in my throat. "Did you see that?" I whispered to my cousin, but he didn't answer. He was staring ahead, wide-eyed, too scared to speak. Uncle Thorne didn't stop. He just kept walking, his pace quickening. "Come on," he said, his voice sharp. "They're close. We're almost there." We moved faster now, the trees closing in around us. The faint rustling grew louder again, and I could swear I heard something following us, moving just beyond the edge of the trees. Something fast, something that wasn't just a figment of my imagination. We pressed on, the darkness pressing in closer, swallowing everything around us. The flashlight beams bounced erratically off the trees as we stumbled through the underbrush, my heart racing in my chest with every step. The closer we got to the clearing Uncle Thorne had mentioned, the more it felt like something was pulling at the edges of my mind, telling me to turn around, to leave. But I couldn't. Something about the way Uncle Thorne moved, like he knew exactly what was coming, kept me going. We came to another clearing, much larger than the last one. The trees around us were thinner here, their trunks twisted and gnarled like the limbs of some ancient creature. The air was unnaturally still, as if the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting for something. My breath came in short gasps, and I could feel my skin prickling with unease. I scanned the darkness around us, but saw nothing, just the shadows of the trees swaying in the windless night. Uncle Thorne stopped in the center of the clearing, his flashlight cutting through the dark like a beacon. He didn't speak at first, just stood there, his eyes flicking from one side to the other, scanning the forest. We all gathered around him, our faces drawn with fear. our footsteps nearly silent on the soft earth. Do you hear it?" Uncle Thorn's voice was low, almost a whisper. I strained to listen, and for a moment, all I could hear was the beating of my own heart. But then, there it was. A sound, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. The softest rustling, like something brushing against the trees, and then something else. A low growl, barely perceptible, coming from somewhere off to the right. My stomach churned, and I found myself taking a step closer to Uncle Thorn, not sure what to expect. He didn't move, just kept his eyes locked on the shadows ahead. I could see his jaw tighten, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "They're close," he muttered, "real close." The rustling grew louder, more frantic, and I felt a rush of panic. Whatever was out there, it wasn't hiding anymore. It was coming for us. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack, like a branch snapping, and I whirled around, heart in my throat. In the distance, I saw it. A shape moving fast, too fast for my eyes to follow. It darted between the trees, just a blur of dark fur and sharp claws. My breath caught in my throat, and I could feel my legs tremble. But Uncle Thorn wasn't scared. He raised his hand, signaling for us to stay silent. "It's one of them," he whispered. "A switchback. Keep your eyes open and stay calm." My mind raced, trying to process what I had just seen. The creature was faster than anything I'd ever encountered, and its movements were too smooth, too fluid. It didn't seem like it was running. It was gliding, effortlessly moving between the trees like it belonged there. The rustling stopped, but the feeling of being watched only intensified. Uncle Thorn didn't wait. He turned on his heel, striding toward the tree line with a determined pace. "Move! Keep up!" I wanted to argue, to say I wasn't sure if I could take another step into that dark, suffocating forest, but the words wouldn't come. I followed, my feet heavy with dread. The trees seemed to close in tighter now, their gnarled branches reaching out like fingers, almost as if they wanted to pull us deeper into the darkness. The switchback was out there, watching us, and I could feel it, its eyes on the back of my neck, its presence pressing in from all sides. We moved in silence, but the tension was unbearable. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves made me flinch. My flashlight flickered again, and I quickly smacked it to get it working. But the beam was weak now, barely cutting through the oppressive blackness. "Stay close," Uncle Thorn's voice broke the silence again. "Don't get separated." We pressed on, our footsteps barely making a sound on the soft earth. The trees around us seemed to close in tighter, their shadows stretching long and dark, almost swallowing us whole. I could feel the sweat dripping down my back, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't stop. I wouldn't stop. The others were right behind me, and I didn't want to fall behind, to be the one who couldn't keep up. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the rustling returned. Louder now. Closer. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the darkness. The trees. The emptiness. But then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, closer this time. So close I could feel it vibrate in the air, like it was coming from deep within the earth itself. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. Something was out there, and it was getting closer. Uncle Thorn didn't hesitate. He spun around, his flashlight flicking back and forth through the darkness. "Get ready," he said, his voice sharp and urgent. "It's coming." The hairs on my neck stood up, and I could feel my legs shaking. But I had no choice but to follow. The hunt had begun, and there was no turning back. We moved faster now, the weight of the forest pressing down on us, urging us to hurry. My legs felt like they were made of lead, and every part of me wanted to stop, to scream, to get out of the woods. But I kept going, my flashlight flickering weakly in front of me, barely lighting the path. The air was thick, almost suffocating, and every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, had me jumping out of my skin. Uncle Thorn led the way, his eyes scanning the darkness ahead, his pace never faltering. He was calm, too calm, and I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his muscles were coiled, ready for whatever was coming. The rest of us, though, were struggling to keep up, our breaths coming in short, shallow gasps. Suddenly, I heard it, a sound that made my blood run cold, a low, rasping growl, followed by a sharp, unmistakable snarl. It was close, way too close. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, staring into the dark, waiting for the next move. The growl came again, this time louder, more insistent, as if whatever it was closing in on us. "Get down!" Uncle Thorn barked, and we all immediately dropped to the ground, scrambling to find cover behind the nearest tree or bush. I crouched low, trying to control my breathing, praying that whatever was out there wouldn't find us. My eyes were wide, my heart hammering in my chest. The darkness around us seemed to shift and pulse, and I couldn't tell if the sound I heard was the wind or the thing stalking us. The growl came again, this time closer than ever, and I could feel the vibrations in the ground beneath me. My mind raced. What was it? What was hunting us? My flashlight flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw something move in the shadows. A shape, low to the ground, moving too fast for me to track. Uncle Thorn's voice cut through the tension, low and urgent. "Stay quiet. Don't move." We huddled in silence, our breath held, waiting for the thing to make its move. The only sound was the beating of my heart, thudding in my ears like a drum. Every instinct told me to run, to escape, but I knew better. Running would make us targets. A branch snapped off to my left, and I whipped my head around, heart racing. The creature was closer, moving through the trees with unnatural speed. I could hear its claws scraping against the bark, and its growls filled the air, vibrating in my chest. It wasn't just one, it was multiple, and they were closing in from all sides. "Now!" Uncle Thorn shouted, and we all scrambled to our feet, instinctively running toward him. The sound of claws on the ground echoed around us as we sprinted through the underbrush, branches and leaves whipping against our faces. The forest felt like it was alive, moving with us, pushing us forward, as if the trees themselves wanted to trap us here. We crashed through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes, our breath ragged in the thick air. I couldn't hear the others, couldn't see them in the darkness. All I could hear was the pounding of my feet and the distant sound of growls getting closer. Suddenly, the ground beneath me gave way. My foot caught on something, and I went tumbling forward, my body slamming into the earth. I gasped, trying to push myself up, but my hands were slick with sweat and dirt. I looked around, panic rising in my chest. The others were ahead of me, but the growls had grown louder, closer. Something was coming. And it wasn't far behind. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing as I heard the sound of someone, screaming in the distance. My blood ran cold. It wasn't one of us. It was something else. Uncle Thorn's voice rang out again, urgent and filled with a kind of terror I'd never heard from him before. "Run! Keep running!" I pushed myself harder, the ground beneath me slipping as I struggled to stay on my feet. The growls were almost deafening now, and I could feel the ground tremble beneath my feet with every step. Whatever was out there was gaining on us, and it wasn't stopping. I turned my head just in time to see something move in the shadows. It was huge, bigger than anything I'd ever seen, with glowing eyes that pierced the dark like a torch. Its body was low to the ground, its limbs long and twisted, like a grotesque mix of a wolf and a bird. And those eyes, they were watching us, focused on me, like it knew exactly where I was. I didn't stop running. We finally burst into another clearing, breathless, panicked. Uncle Thorn didn't stop, didn't even slow down, just kept running ahead. I glanced behind me, and that's when I saw it. The thing was right on our heels, moving faster now, closing the distance. It had to be just a few feet behind. "Keep going!" Uncle Thorne yelled, his voice raw. My legs felt like they were going to give out, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. I looked ahead and saw the glow of the cabin lights just beyond the trees. We were so close, but just as I thought we were safe, a shadow darted out from the side. It was another one of them, another switchback, too quick to react to. It lunged for me. I didn't look back as the switchback lunged for me, but I felt the air shift, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up as it soared past me. It was fast, too fast. Its claws raked the air with a screeching sound that made my stomach churn. I stumbled, my feet barely finding solid ground beneath me, but the glow of the cabin lights was getting closer. I had to make it. We all had to. Uncle Thorne's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. "Keep moving! Don't stop!" The others were ahead of me now, their figures blurred in the distance. I couldn't let myself fall behind. I pushed my legs harder, the pain in my chest sharp with every breath, but I couldn't stop. The switchback had missed me, but I knew it wasn't done. It would keep coming, and I had no doubt there were more out there, waiting for the right moment. I could hear the thudding of something heavy behind me, growing louder, closer. The sound of claws scraping against bark and rock echoed in my ears. It was following us, its growls deep and guttural, mixing with the sound of my own frantic heartbeat. Every instinct screamed at me to run faster, but my body was starting to betray me. My legs felt like lead, and my breath came in ragged gasps. Another snap of branches to my left, and I darted to the side, heart pounding in my throat. The light from the cabin was so close now, just ahead, like a beacon in the dark. But I could hear the switchbacks behind me, closing in. I wasn't going to make it in time. Then, something shifted. A dark shape moved just at the edge of my vision, its glowing eyes cutting through the dark. It was huge, too big, its body long and low to the ground, covered in matted fur. I couldn't see clearly, but the silhouette of its massive frame was enough to know that it wasn't just an animal. It was something else, something worse. I pushed harder, the cabin lights now blinding in their intensity, just beyond my reach. I could see the outline of Uncle Thorne standing by the door, his flashlight beam cutting through the chaos, but he wasn't moving. He was waiting for me. A scream echoed through the woods, distant but unmistakable. One of my cousins. It wasn't loud, just a brief, blood-curdling sound that stopped my heart cold. Something had happened. Something had gotten to them. I turned my head instinctively, and that's when I saw it. The first switchback, the one I'd almost outrun, had caught up with me. Its eyes were glowing bright, 2 pinpricks of light in the dark, and its massive body was leaping toward me, claws extended. It moved with terrifying speed, and I couldn't react in time. I felt the weight of it slam into me, its claws scraping across my arm as it tackled me to the ground. The air was knocked out of my lungs, and I gasped for breath, my body pinned beneath the weight of the creature. I could feel its hot breath on my face, the sharp, pungent odor of it making my stomach churn. I tried to scream, but it felt like my throat was closing up, a blur of motion above me. Uncle Thorne. He lunged, reaching down to pull me free from the creature's grasp. His arms were strong, his hands gripped mine with an ironclad hold. The switchback hissed, baring its teeth, but Uncle Thorne wasn't fazed. He yanked me up and shoved me toward the cabin, his eyes wild with urgency. "Go! Get inside!" His voice was hoarse, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear in his eyes. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I darted for the door, nearly tripping over my own feet as I reached it. I could hear the creatures behind us, growling and snapping, but I didn't look back. I threw myself inside the cabin, slamming the door behind me. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled with the lock. I didn't care that the cabin was small and dark. At least it felt safe, at least for now. Inside, The air was thick with the smell of burning wood, and the warmth of the fire crackled in the hearth. But there was no comfort in it. My heart was still pounding in my chest, my mind racing with everything that had just happened. We were here, but for how long? Uncle Thorne came in a moment later, slamming the door shut behind him. He bolted it quickly, then turned to face me, his face grim. His eyes were wide, like he was trying to process everything that had just occurred. "They're not gone," he muttered under his breath, his voice shaky. He wiped his forehead with the back of his hand, looking at the door as though waiting for it to burst open. I sank onto the floor, my body numb, the adrenaline still rushing through my veins. My mind was spinning, but one thought kept repeating itself over and over. What are they? The fire crackled in the hearth, but it did nothing to warm the chill in the air. We sat there, huddled in the dim light of the cabin, the silence hanging over us like a heavy blanket. My heart was still racing, and I couldn't shake the image of those glowing eyes, the claws, the growl. It was all too real, too close. I couldn't understand what we had just experienced, and I wasn't sure if I ever would. All I knew was that we weren't safe. Not yet. Uncle Thorne paced the small room, his boots heavy against the wooden floor, his eyes darting between the door and the windows as if waiting for something to break through at any moment. I could see the same fear in his eyes that I had felt, the fear of knowing that we weren't done with this. Whatever this was, I thought we'd be okay once we made it inside, I muttered, my voice cracking. I was trying to understand, trying to make sense of it all. Why didn't we just leave? Why didn't we? Uncle Thorne held up a hand, cutting me off. His face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. You don't leave. Not once they've seen you. You don't run. You never run from them. His voice was strained, almost desperate, like he was trying to hold it together. If you run, they'll chase you. And it's not just the switchbacks. They've got others in those woods. Worse things. Things you don't want to meet. I stared at him, trying to process his words. Worse things? What could possibly be worse than the creatures we'd just run from? The ones that moved like shadows, with glowing eyes and claws like knives, but I didn't ask. There was something in Uncle Thorne's voice that told me I didn't want to know. The silence stretched on, and I heard the others shifting behind me. Their faces pale, their eyes wide with the same confusion and fear that I felt. My cousin sat on the other side of the cabin, whispering quietly, but I couldn't make out their words. There was nothing to say. Nothing that could explain what had happened. I stood up abruptly, my legs shaky beneath me. We need to get out of here. We can't just stay locked in here waiting for whatever those things are. Uncle Thorne shook his head. No. We wait until dawn. When the sun comes up, they'll retreat. They're creatures of the dark. But until then, we stay here. And we don't open that door. I wanted to argue. I wanted to shout at him, to tell him that we couldn't just sit here and wait to die. But I didn't. I couldn't. There was something in his eyes now, a look that I'd never seen before. It was a kind of resignation, a silent acceptance of the truth that none of us could deny. We were trapped. And no amount of arguing would change that. Time seemed to slow down as we waited in that cabin. Each creak of the floorboards, every crack of the fire, made me jump. I kept glancing at the door, half expecting it to burst open at any moment. The switchbacks, or something worse, coming for us, but nothing happened. The silence stretched on, heavy and thick. The darkness outside was impenetrable, and I could feel the forest pressing against the cabin, its secrets waiting just beyond the walls. Eventually, exhaustion took over. My eyes grew heavy, my body aching from the adrenaline rush that had long since worn off. I sat back against the wall, trying to find some comfort in the warmth of the fire, but there was no comfort to be found. The air was still too thick, too tense. Just as I was starting to drift off, a loud thud came from outside. I froze, my heart leaping into my throat. My eyes darted toward the door, but Uncle Thorne was already on his feet, his eyes wide and alert. "It's not over," he muttered. His face was grim. "They're still out there." I grabbed for the flashlight, but Uncle Thorne stopped me. "No, don't make a sound. Not yet." I didn't argue. We all sat there, frozen, holding our breath as the sound came again. A heavy thud, followed by a low growl. It wasn't the switchbacks this time. No, this was something else. Something deeper, more guttural, something ancient. The sound sent a chill through my entire body, and I could feel the fear rising in my throat like bile. I looked at Uncle Thorne, and for the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes, the fear that matched my own. He wasn't calm anymore. He wasn't the strong, unshakable figure I had always known. He was just as afraid as we were. The thudding continued. "Closer now. Get the bags," Uncle Thorne whispered urgently. "We need to go. Now." The thudding grew louder, closer, and with each passing second, it felt like the walls of the cabin were closing in around us. My breath came in shallow gasps, my hands trembling as I reached for the old backpack beside me. Uncle Thorne moved swiftly, his face set in determination, but his eyes flickered with that same fear. I could see it now, not just the terror of being hunted, but the deep knowledge that no one had truly escaped the forest's grip. "Everyone, get your things! Quickly," Uncle Thorne ordered, his voice low but sharp. I grabbed the bag in front of me, throwing together what little I could. My flashlight, some granola bars, anything I could carry. My cousins scrambled, their faces pale with fear, but we didn't question Uncle Thorne. We knew that when he gave an order now, there was no time to waste. Another thud. This time, the sound was unmistakable. A heavy, guttural growl that reverberated through the cabin's walls. Something massive was out there, moving in the dark, waiting. "We need to go now," Uncle Thorne said again, but his voice was strained, like it took all his strength to keep it steady. He was the only one of us who seemed to have a plan, but even now, I could tell he didn't know if we'd make it out alive. I could feel the weight of his words sinking in. He was right. We couldn't stay here. There was no safety in the cabin anymore. No one was safe. Not with the creatures prowling outside, drawn to the warmth of the fire, to the scent of our fear. With trembling hands, I slung the bag over my shoulder and moved toward the door, my pulse hammering in my throat. Uncle Thorne was already at the door, slowly and carefully unlocking it, as if every moment was a gamble. He turned to look at me, his face hard, but his eyes haunted. "We move fast, and we don't stop. Do you understand?" he said, his voice low. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I understood anything anymore. What was waiting for us outside? What could we possibly do against something so unnatural? The door creaked open, and a wave of cold air rushed in, followed by the unmistakable scent of the woods. Damp, musty, alive. The shadows outside were thick, but we couldn't afford to waste time. Uncle Thorne stepped out first, leading the way, and we followed, the darkness pressing in from all sides. Every step felt like it might be our last. The trees were closing in again, but there was no time to think about the forest, about the creatures lurking in the night. I had to keep moving. The firelight was fading behind us, the warmth a distant memory as we plunged deeper into the cold, suffocating blackness of the woods. "Stay close," Uncle Thorne's voice came, almost a whisper now. He wasn't looking behind him, his eyes fixed straight ahead. "We're heading for the ridge. It's our only chance." I didn't ask why, didn't ask what was waiting for us at the ridge. I just followed. My legs were burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't think. All I could do was run, and hope we made it out. Another growl, closer this time, too close. I dared a quick glance over my shoulder, but the forest was too dark, too thick. There was nothing behind us, nothing but shadows and the crushing weight of the night. But the sound of claws scraping against bark, the low growl that filled the air, told me everything I needed to know. They were there, watching us. We pushed forward, the ground beneath us uneven and treacherous. I tripped, my foot catching on a root, but I didn't stop. I couldn't. We had to keep moving. Uncle Thorn was already ahead of us, his figure barely visible in the dark. The rest of us stumbled to catch up, but I could feel the switchbacks closing in. They were moving too fast, too close, and soon they would be on us. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we reached the ridge. Uncle Thorn stopped at the edge, his breath coming in heavy pants. We stood there for a moment, catching our breath, listening to the sounds of the forest. No growls, no rustling. Just silence. "We've made it," Uncle Thorn said, his voice barely audible. For now. We all stood there, in the cold, at the edge of the world. The ridge overlooked a vast stretch of the Appalachian wilderness, the trees stretching out like a dark ocean beneath the moonlight. The danger, the chase, seemed far behind us, but I knew better. I knew that what we had just outrun was only the beginning. Uncle Thorn looked at each of us, his eyes filled with a heavy sadness. "This forest doesn't let go of its secrets," he said quietly. "And it never forgets. We'll be back, whether we want to or not. They know us now." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. The fear, the dread, was enough. We had made it, but I knew deep down that this wasn't over. The switchbacks, the creatures of the woods, they were still out there, watching, waiting. And I knew that, no matter where we went, we would never truly be free.